So, if you remember this morning, talking about the enlightenment of the two great disciples and Venerable Mahamoggallana becoming enlightened after listening to a discourse on the elements. So I'd like to expand a little bit on this topic of the elements. So in the suttas, discourses devoted to mindfulness, it's clear that the Buddha gave great importance to mindfulness of the body. And in particular to practices undermining our instinctual attachment to and identification with the physical body is the root of much suffering in our lives. And the practices which lie at the core of this effort to, I guess a modern word would be deconstruct, or to enable us to disidentify, if that's the word, with the body, begin with considering its constituent parts, beginning with the hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin. So there's a list of 32 parts of the body. And considering the body in terms of its constituent parts is one powerful way of undermining this instinctual attachment to the body and obsession with beauty and attractiveness. Another method, and this is the method which was so helpful for Venerable Mahamoggallana, was looking at the body in terms of elements. So there are usually 4 elements, sometimes 6 elements, in which space element is used, but for most contemplation we use the 4 elements. So these are known by the traditional, probably pre-Buddhist terms of earth, water, fire and air. But their meaning is of particular, to be understood in terms of particular qualities. So, for instance, the earth element are all those parts of the body which are hard, so that sense of resistance and hardness is that element of the earth element. So this morning, if you remember, I was recommending being aware of the skeleton as we're walking, as the heel comes down to the ground, you send this impact up through the body, and you can feel the skeleton quite easily. In meditation, to get very simple way, in sitting meditation, to get a feel of the earth element, would be just to put your tongue against the roof of your mouth, so that hardness there. So looking at all the parts of the body which are characterized by hardness and substance is to see it in terms of earth element. Then the water element, of course, all the different fluids in the body are included in the water element. And the water element also is taken to include a sense of cohesion. So the fact that all the different organs in our body don't kind of rub against each other in a very nasty kind of way. The water element provides a cohesion within the different organs, between organs. So that's the sense of the water element is a little bit harder to experience usually as compared with the earth element. But again, a very simple thing you can do is to be aware of saliva in your mouth. That's the water element. But so tears, sweat, this is a water element. Urine, water element. So seeing all these different parts of the body as expressions of water element. The third element, that of fire, the fire element, and that is probably most easily understood as temperature. So although we talk about the fire element and feeling cold, or this sort of sense of coldness in the atmosphere, is also fire element. So the fire element is known directly, most obviously at the skin, the sense of temperature. It's the fire element. Fire element also including the digestive fires and internal fires in the body. And then the air element, obviously most obvious in the breath itself, also in the prana, or the chi, as they say in Chinese, and the internal energy in the body. Movement is proper movement, vibration. These are expressions of the air element. So there are all kinds of, they call winds within the body, and motion within the body is simply the air element. So this is second way, after looking at the body in terms of its constituent parts, and that is particularly powerful in undermining or removing, reducing obsessive interest in the beauty of the body or the sexual attractiveness of the body. The element meditation is more focused on bringing up the perception of not self, seeing the body rather than who we are, and expressing ourself as an individual, begin to see it in terms of solidity, cohesion, temperature, and movement or vibration. We can also look at the external world and see the external solidity of the concrete or the bamboo and all of the hard, solid elements of our environment as being the earth element, and the streams and the rain and all the different fluids that we can see are the water element. Temperature, heat and cold is the fire element. The winds and breezes or their absence, all pointing to the wind element. And so looking at these two together, again we begin to see that the earth element within our body and the earth element external to us are one and the same thing. The water element, the air element, the fire element, the air element similarly. Again, a very practical and effective means of undermining this strong sense of self and others and separation from the world in which we live in. See, the physical body is just elements that we've, as it were, borrowed from nature during the course of our life, and then at the end of a life, the cremation, then those elements return to the natural world. So we look at the body; it's just just a collection of elements that we're borrowing from nature for a few years, and when our time's up, then we give them all back again. So it's a short explanation of elements, and then one of the last passages I read was that Venerable Sariputta reached the acme of knowledge, it's a technical term, knowledge pertaining to a disciple's perfection, and attained to arahantship together with the 4 analytical knowledges. It's called the Patisambhida Jnanas. So the word wisdom, knowledge in Pali is represented by many different words depending on context and depending on a particular aspect of dhamma or aspect of understanding wisdom that the Buddha was pointing to. So jnana is one of the words for knowledge, understanding, wisdom. Patisambhida, here translated as analytical knowledge. So of these, the first 2 topics of these analytical knowledges are a pair of terms which appear very frequently throughout the Buddha's discourses, and they are the words atta and dhamma. So in some cases, the words atta dhamma, the pair of atta and dhamma, is equivalent to the English phrase the spirit and the letter of the rule, for instance. So we can talk about someone keeping to the letter of the rule, but completely ignoring the spirit of the rule. So obviously a very, very common phenomena. So I have a favorite example of this, of a friend of mine visiting senior monk in big monastery in Bangkok. Went to see him quite late night. He was afraid that he might be disturbing him. The door was ajar. He was just have a peek to make sure the monk wasn't resting, asleep. And in fact, the monk was sitting on the floor counting money. And he was a bit shocked because this was a monastery where the monks are supposed to abstain from touching money. And he looked more closely, and he saw that the monk was counting the money with chopsticks, like this. So clearly the monk felt that he wasn't actually touching the money. He was only touching the chopsticks. So this is an example of someone who's keeping to the letter of a rule or of an agreement or of a practice, but overlooking and missing the whole point of it, the purpose of it, the benefit of it. So in some cases, atta can be translated as the spirit. In other cases, the benefit, the purpose, the goal, the result. And the word dhamma here again can refer to the letter of the law, can refer to the method, the detail. And this word dhamma, I'm sure familiar to everyone. Again, it's used in many different ways in the Pali Canon, simply to list all the ways that the word dhamma is used would occupy a whole study session, probably, or a whole discourse. One of the advantages of the English language or English orthography in rendering Buddha's teachings is the use of capital letters. So in an English, when we're writing or translating Buddha's teachings into English, when we're talking about the teachings or the ultimate nature of reality and using the word dhamma, then we tend to use a capital D. And then when we're referring to dhamma as in this particular context, then we use a small d. So that's a kind of advantage of English language, at least. So at its widest, broadest meaning, dhamma just means thing, basically. So we say all dhammas are impermanent. That means all things. So everything is a dhamma. So you have kusala dhammas, akusala dhammas, apayakata dhammas. These are all modifications or qualities of dhammas. So there's another word which covers very much the same ground as dhamma in this sense, and that's the word sankhara. So again, this word sankhara, quite a complex term, and has different meanings in different contexts. But in its broadest meaning, we usually translate as all conditioned things. So sankharas are conditioned things, and dhammas are things. So if you imagine a Venn diagram, then there's just a tiny area in which dhamma peeks out from the sankhara circle, if you can imagine that, and that is nibbana. So everything except for nibbana is a sankhara, is a conditioned thing. So when we say, when you find these terms, all sankharas are this, all sankharas are that, in the teachings it means all conditioned things, and it means everything except for nibbana. So in the morning chanting, there is a famous passage where it says, all sankharas, all conditioned things are impermanent. All sankharas, all conditioned things are dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactory or incomplete, flawed, imperfect. And all dhammas are anatta, or not self. So this is to emphasize that nibbana is a dhamma. It's not a sankhara, it's not a conditioned thing. It can't bring nibbana into existence through practice. This nibbana is an unconditioned. So we say, the conditioned and the unconditioned. So it means everything plus nibbana. So in this particular context, the word dhamma has kind of quite a modest meaning, and the emphasis is really on method and causes. So having an understanding of how to go about something practically. So in any endeavor, we need to have a knowledge, don't we, both of the goal, clear understanding of what the goal, what's the purpose, and also what is the method by which we can reach that goal and reach that purpose. So these are the two, dhamma and atta. In terms of personalities, and then an imbalance in personalities, then I think we can look at it in terms of these two words also, in that some people are like a big picture people, and just talk about really profound things like emptiness and nibbana and all these kinds of things, and you just, wow, that's so inspiring and so uplifting, but find some kind of resistance and be somewhat neglectful of the hard work needed and the specific kinds of effort needed and to realize the truth of those profound terms as a direct experience, which is the real purpose of what we're doing. But even in worldly activities, we often come across people like this who are find the details kind of irritating. I don't want to be bothered with those kind of stuff, just keep your eye on the goal. So that kind of wanting to be inspired and needing to feel inspired and finding the details of daily life kind of boring and depressing and beside the point. Whereas there are other people who are quite the opposite, who love the details and lack skills to prioritize their effort and give importance to every small detail and wanting everything to be exactly right and exactly perfect. So can see they're very focused and very diligent and hard-working, and yet getting bogged down in the details and forgetting the big picture. So this is, I think, this kind of useful reflection, in any kind of long-term project to find that balance, and not to, if you find yourself your tendency to be too much interested in the big picture and the goal and the inspiring side of the project, and overlooking the nitty-gritty, the everyday details needed to progress, or else to become completely bogged down and almost paralyzed by attention to details. Or again, in meditation practice, it can be, especially if you're doing a lot of formal meditation, can become overly concerned with the experience in each individual meditation session, and the ups and downs become really stressful. In the case, you have to stand back a little bit and see a big picture of this overall practice for nibbana. So some people would say, "Oh, I've been meditating now for 10 years, and 10 whole years, and I just don't feel I'm getting anywhere." So my reply to that is often, do you know what a kalpa is? Now you might think that's a non sequitur, but the reason is that it's a very long period of time, and the wonderful simile given is of a stone mountain. not an easily kind of permeable mountain like limestone mountain, like granite, let's say. And it's 1 yojana long, which is about maybe 12 kilometers, and 12 kilometers wide and 12 kilometers high. This is the big, like a kind of Ayers Rock kind of, that thing in Australia, but bigger and harder. And once every 100 years, somebody comes along with a feather and runs the feather along the side of this mountain. And now, if you can, it's a mental exercise, try to imagine how long it would take for that mountain to erode away to nothing merely through the once in 100 year impact of a feather. So that's 1 kalpa. And the Buddha could remember kalpa after kalpa after kalpa. He could remember a huge number of kalpas, and then on the basis of this kind of memory, he said no beginning of this wandering on in samsara can be seen. So the Buddha is always very, very scientific in his pronouncements. He was very, very careful with his language. He didn't say there's no such thing as a beginning of all this, but he says no such thing can be seen, at least with his incredible, unimaginable memory, that he has not been able to discover a beginning of all of this. So, if we've been wandering in samsara, birth, aging, sickness, death, birth, aging, sickness, death, birth, aging, sickness, death, birth, aging, sickness. See, I've only said it 4 times and you're already bored. Just imagine for kalpas and kalpas, this is what's been going on. And now let's return to, I've been meditating for 10 years and I'm still, you see, so it's a matter of context, isn't it? I mean, be patient. So this is atta and dhamma. And then the third kind of patisampidanyana concerns use of language. So I think in a modern idiom, we would talk about like really superb communication skills as being one of the aspects of wisdom that Venerable Sariputta developed or perfected. When I remember, I don't know these days, but years ago when I was first studying this as a young monk, and there was a generally held opinion that this particular jnana referred to an ability to speak different languages, and that there's this idea that if you're an arahant, you can speak all the different languages just naturally and spontaneously, or not just the languages of human beings, languages of birds and other creatures as well. I don't think that's true, and I don't think it refers to particular languages, but it refers to the languages which you can already speak, and refers to communication skills, ability to speak in a way which is appropriate to the audience, using language, using terms which are can be easily understood, to be able to explain complex matters in very clearly, without too much jargon, and to be able to simplify without distorting the teachings. So we all want to be able to understand things that we don't understand, and when someone can present something which we've struggled with in a very simple, easily understandable way with similes and metaphors, you have to be very mindful and very careful, not just to jump onto that. At last, now I can understand that. It's this desire to understand, and this kind of frustration at not being able to understand can easily make us heedless or careless. And the use of metaphor is particularly dangerous. We always have to remind ourselves that metaphors are not proofs of an argument, they're illustrations. And I have an example from my school days. And this example is from the First World War. And the First World War was a kind of stalemate between the Allied forces and the German, Italian forces, and there was a long line of trenches from Belgium all the way to the south of Europe. And in an effort to break this deadlock, this rather brilliant young man who was government minister of the Admiralty, was later to become Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, he presented a plan to the government, and he showed them a map of Europe, and he compared the line of trenches running down through Europe like the armor on a dragon or some kind of monster. And he pointed to Turkey, and he said, this is the soft belly of the beast. And if we attack this area, we can defeat the dragon without having to pierce the armor. So he's quite brilliant public speaker. And he was, through the power of his imagery, and because he was giving them something that they wanted so desperately, they went for it, and led to one of the great disasters, at least from the Allied point of view, in the First World War, in which thousands upon thousands of soldiers, British, Australian, New Zealand, Canadians, Indian, died in Gallipoli, and the whole new front that was opened up, simply through the seductive power of a metaphor. So I've always remembered this example and very, very careful. So I think that one of the marvelous qualities of Ajahn Chah, my teacher, was that he was able to express very profound, complex matters very simply and with memorable metaphors and similes, but ones which did not oversimplify, did not distort the meaning, simply in order to give people this comforting feeling, well, that's that one ticked off, now I know what that one means. So this kind of communication skills, knowing how to get through to people, knowing how to create the base of trust which must precede any kind of effective communication. So it's not just means he was articulate and could speak well, but knew that even if you can speak very, very well, if the person you're talking to doesn't trust you, then the words will just go in one ear and out the other. So the Venerable Sariputta was renowned for his skill in expressing the teachings, in articulating the teachings, and also in tailoring, customizing the teachers in a way that was appropriate to his audience. And the fourth kind of patisambhida jnana, or knowledge of analytical meaning, is what we call in Thai is like patipan wuhan. Forget what the Pali is now, excuse me. So it's often translated as the knowledge of ready wit. So what that means is that Venerable Sariputta and great masters like Ajahn Jayasaro, they were able to respond spontaneously the moment, be asked questions or confronted with situations and challenges for which they had no time to prepare. And yet they were able to respond in a most appropriate and effective way without having to think it all through beforehand. So this, so we're familiar with this idea of someone being witty, but that's more like in a worldly sense. Of someone can play with words, and someone can throw something back at you, and in very quick-moving mind. So this is the arahant, or one who has developed this patisambhida jnana, is incredibly quick mind, but it's a quickness of mind that is a result of that the dhamma is just so completely absorbed and part of the whole way. Every thought, every perception is seen in terms of dhamma. That when a question is posed or some difficulty, problem arises, then the response is an effortless expression of the dhamma. We can find as examples of this from great teachers of our own time, and from Ajahn Chah, I believe, in which he's asked questions and he replies with a question. That's also, let me just include here in the 4 ways of answering a question. Okay, so one is to give a direct answer. They say, are we in Chiangmai? And we say yes. And then questions which should not be answered yes or no, even if they're posed in a yes, no, black and white, this or that format. But these are questions which require us to tease the question apart and answer it in different to discriminate between the different parts of the question. You say, oh, you're in Chiangmai. Oh, is Chiangmai a nice place? Well, what does nice place mean, and what are our criteria for a nice place? If we say, well, fresh air, then maybe it's not always such a nice place. They're talking about nature or culture, or so. If we had the time and we wanted to give someone a complete answer, we could talk about this: the people that we meet in Chiangmai, the natural environment, the culture, the religion, and so on. But unless it was a very superficial conversation, is it a nice place? Oh yes, it's a nice place. But we really wanted to reply to that person, then we would have to answer in a more complex way. The third way of answering questions is to reply with a counter question. And this is familiar in the Zen Buddhist tradition in particular, but again, teachers in my tradition are also known for this. So a counter question throws the question back on the questioner, and often it's a little bit shocking and just makes someone wake up and question their assumptions and their beliefs and the reason why they asked the question in the first place. And then the fourth way of answering question is not to reply at all, because you realize that whatever you say will just make things worse, or that person doesn't have a genuine interest in listening to what you have to say. So if someone has a very fixed views and ideas and beliefs, and that replying to them will only confuse them or make it make things even more confused, then it's better to not to reply. So of course, not replying to a question can be seen quite rude sometimes. So in Thailand, we have this beautiful convention, and means when someone asks you a question and you don't want to reply, you smile. And that smile means, I don't feel comfortable to answer your question. It's wonderful, isn't it? But it only works if the person understands the convention. Otherwise they can think that you get angry sometimes. Okay. So we've been through the four elements and the four patisampita jnanas, and that's like real study, isn't it? Okay, now I'm going to skip the passage in this book. It's quite good fun, but it refers to the stories about the original aspiration in past lives and past life experiences of Venerable Sariputta, and in the Jatakas, in which he often had a relationship with the Bodhisattva which prefigured or mirrored the kind of relationship he had in his last life with the Buddha. So now on to the section called Sariputta the Man, or the chief disciple. In the Mahapadana Sutta, Digha Nikāya 14, okay, I'm going to comment on that as well. So the discourses of the Buddha in the Pali Canon are divided into nikāyas, and there are 5 nikāyas. The Digha Nikāya, Majjhima Nikāya, Samyutta Nikāya, Anguttara Nikāya, and Khuddaka Nikāya. So the Digha Nikāya is a collection of the longer suttas. The word Digha means long. If you remember, Sariputta's nephew was called Long Nails, Digha Naka. So Digha means long. And the longest of the Buddha's discourses, 32 of them, are gathered together in this collection called the Digha Nikāya. And the Mahapadana Sutta is one of the suttas in this discourse collection. Then the second Nikāya is called the Majjhima Nikāya, consists of 152 suttas, and many of the most famous and seminal important suttas are to be found in the Majjhima Nikāya. So these Nikāyas are further divided, and the Majjhima Nikāya, 152 suttas, is further divided into three main Punasas, I don't know what the English name, but, and they are further subdivided into groups of suttas, and those groups of suttas might, for instance, be gathered under a heading of teachings to headmen in villages, or teaching to devas, or teachings on this, or teachings on that. So these are the 152 suttas. Then the Samyutta Nikāya, the connected discourses. These are the discourses which are grouped together on the basis of subject matter. So you have one whole section devoted to teachings on the five khandhas, one whole section devoted to the paticca samuppada, one whole section devoted to the six sense bases. The first big section, teachings to devas. Then the fourth collection of discourses, called the Anguttara Nikāya, are discourses gathered together in terms of the number of points. So the Buddha was teaching in an oral culture, one in which information was passed, was memorized and passed down orally. And so we find in the suttas many of the characteristics of such teachings and information. So there's a lot of repetition, a lot of mnemonic devices, a lot of where important words and concepts will have like 3, 4, 5 different words to represent one idea, so that if one of them was to get lost or forgotten, you've still got 3 or 4 there to make sure that the meaning survives. And one of the most characteristic means of organizing teachings and presenting the teachings by the Buddha was to give a certain number. So we were all familiar with the 3 refuges and the 4 noble truths and the 5 hindrances and the 5 spiritual powers, etc., etc. So this collection of discourses works on this same principle. So the first book is the Book of Ones. All the teachings were just one thing. In that teaching of, you might think, well, teaching of ones, what are the ones? One of the teachings is the list of all the monks and nuns and laymen and laywomen who are foremost in certain area of spiritual life. And then you have the Book of Twos and the Book of Threes and the Book of Fours and the Book of Fives and the Book of Sixes and the Book of Sevens and so on. So, and then the last of these discourse collections is called the Khuddaka Nikāya, and this is one in which there is more variation in different schools because it's a miscellaneous group. So in some sects there were teachings and included, and in others excluded. But it includes things like the Jatakas, the past life stories of the Buddha, a very important group of discourses called the Sutta Nipata. It includes the Udana, the utterances and the inspired utterances of the Buddha. It includes what else? One of the more kinds of less accepted are these stories about patas, about hungry ghosts, and so on. So this is the Dhammapada, of course, probably the most well-known of all Buddhist texts, is in the Khuddaka Nikāya. So if we are, one of the reasons for telling you this is if you want to look something up, a particular topic, and then where would you start? Well, if it's, let's say you wanted to find out about the 7 enlightenment factors, then you could go to the Samyutta Nikāya and see if there's a particular Samyutta or a particular group within those connected discourses devoted specifically to enlightenment factors, and there is. And as there are 7 enlightenment factors, you could go to the Anguttara Nikāya and go to the Book of Sevens and flick through it and see where the 7 bojjhangas or enlightenment factors are dealt with. And then, of course, just with a general search and index of the Majjhima and the other Nikayas, you can also find references that you need. So, quick recap: Digha Nikāya, 32 long discourses; Majjhima Nikāya, 152 middle-length discourses. Sorry, I think I may have omitted that. Majjhima meaning middle or middle length. Then the Samyutta Nikāya, organized on the basis of subject matter, and Anguttara Nikāya, organized on the basis of the number of dhammas, the number of teachings, and Khuddaka Nikāya, miscellaneous, in which all the other teachings are gathered. Okay. So in the Mahapadana Sutta, which is the 14th of the 32 long suttas in the Digha Nikāya, the Buddha relates various details about the 6 Buddhas who preceded him, beginning with the Buddha Vipassi 91 eons ago, 91 kalpas ago, 91 big stone mountains ago. He mentions their names, the periods in which they arose, their caste and clan, their lifespan, and the milestones of their teaching careers. He also states the names of their 2 chief disciples, who are in each case described as the chief pair of disciples, the excellent pair, the Sāvaka Yugang Akang Badha Yugang. And elsewhere in the Pali Canon, in the Samyutta Nikāya, the collected discourses, the Buddha declares that all the Buddhas of the past had a pair of chief disciples, such as he had in Sariputta and Moggallana, and all the Buddhas to rise in the future will likewise have such a pair. From such statements we can see that the posts of chief discipleship are inherent in the very nature of the Buddha's dispensation. Thus, in appointing 2 monks as chief disciples, our Buddha, Gautama, was not acting according to his own caprice, but was conforming to a timeless paradigm, a paradigm followed by all the fully enlightened ones of the past and to be followed by all their successors in the future.